Conversation is one of the most important things we can master in life. It allows us to learn from each other, to find new ways to look at the same world, and to form friendships and relationships with people who were once strangers. Given that there's practically an infinite number of things that we can share with and learn from each other, why do we so often get stuck in unsatisfying small talk where we run out of things to say? Well, I think good conversation boils down to 4 things, which a lot of people get wrong without realizing. I'm going to tell you exactly what these 4 components are and explain how you can master each of them so that you can start having more engaging conversations with less awkward silences. The first part to this is becoming a good listener. Stephen Covey famously said, "Most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply." And he was right. When most people listen to someone, they're not actually paying attention to the thoughts and ideas they're trying to convey. Instead, they're just waiting for a good opportunity to reply with something that they would like to share, which often leads to sort of half conversations where it's just 2 people saying things at each other. When someone is talking to you, you should aim to actually take in everything they're saying. This doesn't just mean listening to the words coming out of their mouth. You need to actually think about what's being said to you and notice the thoughts and ideas that pop up in your head. I wonder how that would have felt. Does this change the way I look at things? Wow, I really respect that about this person. As well as actually making you learn more from other people, it will also help you generate more thoughtful and relevant responses, which show the other person that you are actually listening to what they were saying. If you really listen to what someone is saying and put effort into the conversation, you are much less likely to run out of things to say. As well as making conversation more interesting and engaging for you, being a good listener will actually just make people like you more. This is simply because people like being listened to. We live in a world where attention is an incredibly finite resource. So one of the best ways to make someone actually feel important and interesting is to pay attention to them. Another way to be a better listener is to pause for a couple of seconds before replying to someone. If you reply immediately after someone finishes speaking, it will look like you weren't really listening and you were just waiting for your turn to speak. But by pausing for a moment before you respond to someone, it shows that you are actually thinking about what that person said, and it also gives you more time to think of a good response. Really listening in a conversation can also help if you're socially anxious. Some people worry so much about what they should say and how they're appearing that they're not actually paying proper attention to the conversation, and this means they won't really have anything to add. If you intensely focus on what the other person is saying, you'll naturally worry less about yourself because attention is finite and you'll have less to dedicate to your own anxiety. Now, a lot of people can struggle to stay this focused on someone, so here are a few things that could help. First, you need to just let go. Try and avoid the habit of thinking of something you want to say and then zoning out while the other person is talking until you get the opportunity to say it. We've all done this and it can really kill conversation if you do. Another thing you can do is make it a habit to constantly think, am I really listening to this person? I started doing this a couple of weeks ago, and every now and then when I'm talking to someone, this thought will pop up in my head, and often I'll find that I'm not properly listening to them and it reminds me to. Practicing mindfulness will also really help you to feel more present. I won't go into that in this video, but there are a lot of good resources out there which you can find. Now, being a good listener will make your conversations a lot more engaging, but you still need to know how to keep conversations flowing between different topics in a way that lets you actually connect with other people. I think the first big mistake people make here is going into what's called interview mode. This is when people just ask question after question in an attempt to sound interested and keep the conversation going, but fail to get the other person to open up about themselves. Although you are showing an interest in the other person, this comes across as very unnatural and often prevents the conversation from becoming more personal. A great way you can prevent this is to make the questions that you ask more open-ended. For example, just asking someone if they like something prompts them to give a short yes or no answer, but by changing that slightly and asking what someone likes about something will make them think and open up more, which makes the response longer and more personal. One of the best questions you can ask someone is simply why. Why did you decide to study art? Why don't you like classical music? It's a really simple question, but it shows that you're curious to see why they think the way that they do, and is a great way of learning from other people. If you're struggling to tell whether a question is interesting or not, a good test is to ask yourself, is this something they would tell everyone or just me? If it's something that they're likely to tell everyone they meet, then it's likely that the question is boring and not too personal. Another thing you have to do is make sure you don't just bounce back and forth between asking questions and answering them. The other person wants to get to know you too, and it will feel unnatural if they're the only person really talking about themselves. When someone answers a question, you want to first talk about their answer a little bit before asking another question. You could relate to something they said and share a little bit about yourself. This makes sure that there's a more even exchange of information, which makes the conversation feel a lot more natural. Conversations can become boring when you talk about the same thing for too long, so you want to be able to naturally switch between different topics to keep the conversation interesting. This is especially true in the earlier stages of talking to someone, where you want to make the transition from small talk to more meaningful conversation. One great way to do this is to use the Ford method, which stands for family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. These 4 areas all make up a huge part of people's lives, so naturally, by talking about them, we can learn a lot about each other. And similarly, by diverting conversation to topics you are more interested in, you'll naturally have more to say and more to talk about. One good way to shift the topic of conversation is when someone mentions something that you want to know more about, you repeat what they said, but as a question. For example, if someone told you that they went to see a film with their brother, you could say, "Oh, you have a brother." Just repeating what someone said in a curious way will make them open up more about it naturally. You can also divert conversation by ending what you say with a question about a specific topic and smoothly linking the two together. For example, if someone asks if I play any instruments, I could say, "Yeah, I play piano. When I was younger, my dad used to play all the time, which made me want to start. What about you? Do you come from a musical family?" There's basically no limit to how you can segue between different topics like this, and it's just something that you'll naturally get good at with more practice. You can also keep conversations from being boring by being a bit more playful. One thing you can do is right after you ask a question, you then say, "Wait, no, let me guess," and then you guess the answer. This is a bit more fun than just asking a straight question, and it can open new avenues of conversation when the other person asks, "Why did you guess that?" It can also be fun to ask people more hypothetical questions, like, "What do you think you would do in that situation?" Because this lets people explore their imagination and their own moral values without being confined to their own boring lives. A final piece of advice for connecting with people in a conversation is to think critically and actually tell someone if you disagree with something they've said. Talking to other people lets you see how they view the same world as you differently. And the best conversations are the ones which you come away from with new ideas. So you want to make sure you're actually as honest as possible with each other. The way to do this is, if you disagree with something someone has said, but you believe they have genuine reason to think the way that they do, you say something like, "I totally get where you're coming from, but I actually look at it this way, here's why." This will likely lead to a healthy discussion about why your views are different, and hopefully both of you should come away with new views on the topic. Remember, just because it hurts when someone disagrees with you doesn't mean you're right. Everyone struggles with this, but you should always be seeking to learn from others. The third component to actually having natural and effortless conversations is being able to freely express yourself. Most people filter their speech to try and avoid sounding boring or weak or uncool, which means we'll either put effort into shaping something that isn't the truth, or we won't say anything at all, even when we do have something to share. This doesn't just make conversations stall, it's also counterproductive, because people who open up more and show more vulnerability are actually more likable. We don't want to be around people who portray themselves as perfect. We want to be around people who show their imperfections and weaknesses, because we are also not perfect. No one is. And when someone is honest about their own weaknesses and imperfections, it makes us feel more comfortable being ourselves. So you should make an effort to be more transparent and actually show your weaknesses instead of trying to hide them from people. Another thing that makes us filter our speech is feeling the need to always smoothly transition between different topics. We'd often rather not say anything at all than say something that seems unnatural or out of place. And this is what leads to awkward silences. There's always an infinite number of things you could say to someone, but you would rather wait in silence until you think of something that feels more natural and acceptable to say. The thing is, you can say pretty much anything you like and make it sound natural, as long as you say it like you believe that it's natural. There's a big difference between someone who's desperately scrambling trying to find something to say to fill an awkward silence, and someone who's confident enough to just say what's on their mind. Only about 7% of communication is actually the words that come out your mouth. If you say something with enough confidence and self-belief, chances are it won't feel out of place. The final component to good conversation is actually being comfortable with silence. If someone can see that you're completely content with yourself and their company, then they won't feel awkward when conversation drifts and nothing is being said. This is especially true on dates. If conversation comes to a pause and you just sit there fidgeting, desperately looking for something to say to fill the silence, It will be awkward, but if you're comfortable enough to just take a few seconds and look into someone's eyes, just completely being there in that moment, it will really build sexual tension and show a lot of confidence. You should also make it a habit to pause for a few seconds after someone has finished speaking to reflect on what they actually said, as well as making it easier to keep up with the pace of conversation. This will show the other person that you're really taking in what they said and will allow you to form more thoughtful responses. So, we've talked about being a good listener, connecting with people in an interesting way, freely expressing yourself, and being comfortable with silence. These will all do a huge amount to improve your conversations, but sometimes, inevitably, you will come to a point where a conversation halts and you just can't think of anything to say. So, here's a few techniques you can use to reignite conversation when it completely stalls. The first is called a cold read, which is where you make an assumption about someone, often a compliment, in order to spark a new discussion. For example, saying something like, "You look like you're very into fashion," will likely lead to the other person saying something along the lines of, "Thank you, what made you say that?" And then you can explain why you made that assumption in a way that brings you back into the flow of conversation. The next thing you can do is point out something in the environment you're in and talk about it. Something like, "I love how sunny it is right now, I wish I could go on holiday." Or, "See that guy over there? He reminds me of my brother." If you can find something that reminds you of a topic you would like to talk about, this is a great way to smoothly transition into a conversation about it. Another thing you can do is ask what are called revival questions, which are very generic but open-ended questions, like, "So how did you guys meet?" Or, "Have you got any big plans for the holidays?" It can be good to prepare a few of these to just have in your pocket in case you need them. And one more thing that can help reignite conversation is just to go back to a previous topic that you were talking about. If you're having a conversation and it sort of trails off and then there's an awkward pause, you can say something like, "So, you said you're into cooking," and then instantly you're back into conversation. So, those are what I consider the 4 main components to having good conversations. It will take some time to learn and apply this advice, but you will become a lot better at conversation as you just gain more experience. It's important to remember that conversation is a skill that you have to level up, and by accepting that not every conversation will be amazing, it can take off a lot of pressure. If confidence is something that you struggle with, then one of the things that really helped me was actually starting to work out and gain some muscle. Just feeling stronger and knowing that I looked better made me feel a lot more confident interacting with people. If you think this could help you, then go and watch this video I made explaining exactly what to do to maximize muscle growth.